Their little stickies are clustered by what organizations they participate in, and you'll notice that at the center there is a big cluster of IDESG members, and there are also a number of other interesting institutional affiliations. On the right-hand side, there's a diagram which illustrates the identification regimes in a variety of countries, including a row for the United States which has not been filled out yet, and rows for other countries which have been filled out during a set of discussions that took place at IIW yesterday. So you're invited, number one, to take a look at this, and number two, to participate online. You can get in touch with Kalia to find out how to do that in filling out this artifact and trying to identify the constituents of identification ecosystems in various different countries. In a minute, I'm going to introduce Jim. First, I wanted to call your attention to a news story which came out today. How many of you saw the news about Bloomberg and what they did? So what the news story says is that reporters at Bloomberg News used access to information in the Bloomberg company systems about which traders at various different financial firms were logging on to their systems at what times to discover information about patterns of activity, which they then used to report news stories, including apparently that they used information indicating that Bruno Ixel hadn't logged onto his system for a while to ask the question to JP Morgan whether he had left the bank. I call it to your attention both because it is a privacy-related matter and we're getting ready to have a privacy talk, but also because it, I think, is a pretty clear illustration of the fact that that use of anonymous credentials is not just an individual civil liberties concern. There are all sorts of patterns of use of identity information that can have all kinds of consequences, and I think it repays looking at that story relatively closely and seeing seeing what's going on there. There are also some analyses online of the ATM caching attacks which were reported yesterday, and those are also very relevant to what we're doing here. So I do want to bid you my personal goodbyes. I'm flying home now to attend my father's birthday party tomorrow, so I'll be passing the baton off to Dasa to do the wrap-up with Jeremy and Peter at the end after I introduce Jim here. But what you're about to hear is an update from the Privacy Committee, including a very preliminary discussion of something that I had asked them to consider, and that was whether there are aspects of the privacy evaluation methodology that might be more broadly useful than just for our own internal evaluations, and whether there might be something that we could recommend to other organizations. And this isn't a deliverable. It is it's early thinking and a chance to discuss with you guys whether there's an opportunity there. So I'd like to thank Jim in advance for the presentation. Hopefully it will be a lively discussion, and I will see you all online and at the next meeting. Thank you very much for all the hard work you've done this week and for your participation. I think it's been a really good meeting.
I got a lavalier, theoretically. Hey, safe travels. Thanks very much. We'll see you. Good afternoon, everybody. You know, this is the last slot before the wrap-up, and normally people wouldn't be real happy about having that presentation slot, but I like it because I know I have your undivided attention. And the reason I know that is because I know exactly what every one of you are thinking right now, which is, when's he going to shut up so we can get to the next section and get out of here, okay? I'm going to try to make this quick but informative, give you a little bit of a background on what we've been doing with the PEM and its implementation, and then as we've changed the title a bit, this isn't really about PEM 2.0. This is also about a proposal for creating a privacy articulation deliverable. And articulation's in brackets for a particular reason. We're not locking ourselves into a descriptive term. We're trying to frame up what a deliverable might look like that articulates a bit of a description around some privacy aspects related to our guiding principle of enhancing privacy and civil liberties, and this notion of privacy accreditation. So let me start with a little bit of what's been happening on the Privacy Committee. We've been working fairly effectively as a committee since the August launch of the IDESG, and have built some structures that have helped us operate a little more efficiently, and a couple of these are relatively new. So if I've got a pointer on here, yes, I do. Ooh, green, nice. So we started out with the Privacy Evaluation Methodology Development Subcommittee, and they took on the task almost immediately of developing our PEM. And one of the things that they've done is, recognize that the PEM is going to be an evolving document. So that subcommittee has now shifted from this initial version 1.0 release to focusing on what we're going to build in version 2.0. One of the elements defined in our, hey, backwards doesn't seem to be an option, Laura. There we go. One more time. Okay. So one of the mechanisms of executing the PEM is our evaluation subcommittee. And so we've formed now an evaluation subcommittee. Currently, I'm kind of chairing that as an interim basis, but that group is composed of our liaisons. It is directed at doing the actual evaluations under the methodology. And then two other subcommittees that we've set up are the Proactive Privacy Guidance Subcommittee, which is being led by our Vice Chair, Jay Stanley. And that group is really looking at how we develop articulations about privacy issues or other things that the IDESG should be aware of, so that we can help raise the visibility of these issues, make sure that people have some sort of understanding or otherwise getting a perspective from the experts on the Privacy Committee around what are, in many cases, very difficult and complex privacy issues. And then lastly, but not leastly, great, it's going to be a long afternoon, membership and outreach. And this is not to be confused with the Communications Committee, but we recognize very, very early that the Privacy Committee comes with certain responsibilities in the form of this evaluation. And in order for us to be effective, we have to maintain a healthy membership and participation in our committee. So Debbie Diener is leading membership and outreach, and that is helping us make sure that the Privacy Committee has, grows its membership, has individuals participating, and that we're able to, fulfill our obligations as a committee. And that group is working with Communications Committee to make sure that as they go out and interact with their peers on a professional basis in the privacy community, that they're able to describe and solicit participation in both the IDESG as an organization as well as in the Privacy Committee. So these are the structures we have, and it does work fairly well right now. We've been operating under this model for a couple months, and the reports we're getting from these subcommittees are very helpful. I think from my perspective, it helps us divide the work and keep focus on the individual subcommittees, and is helping to make the Privacy Committee as a whole a fairly productive committee. So let me talk briefly about some of our current implementation efforts on the PEM. We've done a number of things. And for anyone who attended our workshops the last week of April, this is going to be a little bit of a repeat, not the entire 2-hour workshop, though. So very early on, we started appointing liaisons to the various committees, and to a large extent have liaisons in place. Liaisons are an important part of our privacy evaluation methodology because they are the sort of vanguard of the privacy evaluation, working with the committee, helping identify when a work product is under development, providing privacy expertise, and generally helping facilitate the informal stages of the evaluation process. If you'll recall, at the Phoenix Plenary, we did a fairly quick overview of the PEM, where we went through the process. We talked about the criteria a bit. We actually ratified and released version 1.0 of the PEM at the Phoenix Plenary. As I mentioned, we formalized the evaluation subcommittee, which is really the central hub of our evaluation process. And then We committed to in Phoenix holding workshops before the next plenary, and just by the skin of our teeth managed to hold a couple workshops on the PEM where we did a very detailed, workshop, literally a workshop. It was interactive. We had probably about 45 people attend, held 2 workshops the last week of April, so just within the last couple of weeks. These are the current liaisons the Privacy Committee has to the various committees. And if you're one of our liaisons and you're here, do you mind standing up? So Anne, and where's Naomi? Naomi's in the back, Jim Zock. I think all of these people are really working quite hard. Being a liaison means double duty. It means you go and attend another committee's meetings as well as the Privacy Committee meetings. You attend evaluation subcommittee meetings. So they are working, double or triple what most other folks are who are participating in just a single committee. Can I get some applause for my liaisons, please? All right. Thank you. So we've got a couple evaluations that are either, and I want to say couple, we've got one that we've done, and we talked a little bit about this in Phoenix. We did a informal evaluation of the IDESG website. We've wrapped that up. We've produced the report. We provided that to Management Council Secretariat. Among the outcomes of this was certainly our alpha test of the privacy evaluation methodology. And the results are excellent. The methodology works. It's very effective. It helps us considerably in terms of articulating privacy risks and issues, and I think is fit for use in terms of the primary goal of evaluating the IDESG work products. And then we're expecting, I think, a formal submission in imminent, I would say is the word, from the Financial Services Committee, their value proposition, which we had a few weeks ago. We provided some feedback informally. They went back and incorporated that feedback. So we're anticipating that formal deliverable, or that deliverable being submitted formally to the privacy evaluation methodology here in the near term. Let me talk briefly about PEM 2.0 and what we're trying to do with that. In particular, when we built the methodology, we had our privacy evaluation workbook. And the privacy evaluation workbook was constructed and had a framework for the evaluation and a framework for the criteria, and elements of that were still yet to be populated. In particular, the guidance, or how would I describe it? The reference guidance to how you use no, so that's not the right way to put it. It's the more particular instructions relative to the life cycle that help an individual using the methodology interpret the guidance that's in there. Now, that sounds really confusing. I'll show you in a second what I mean. But we're continuing to do the development on that. There's other material that's being incorporated. The next version of 2.0 is actually being subjected to a cycle of review and a cycle of release that we think we can operate on a quarterly basis. And the process is fairly straightforward. The PEM dev team solicits feedback from various committee members, from members of the IDESG, from feedback from the actual application of the PEM. They then go and discuss that feedback, try to figure out what needs to be amended or otherwise incorporated. They ostensibly achieve a consensus and then incorporate that into the next version of the PEM. Once they've finished and finalized that, they provide that to the committee, who can also provide input or otherwise reviews that document. Once that's done, we basically will release a new version of the PEM. Now, process will remain the same unless there's some defect in the process, but the criteria and the articulations associated with that criteria will evolve and change. Now, one caveat or commitment that we're making, and that I think should be reinforced, is if you're in a committee and have a work product that undergoes formal privacy evaluation, you're essentially locked into the version that you start with. So if we release version 3 and you're starting on version 2, we're going to keep the evaluation based on version 2. So we're not going to change criteria or any of the elements of the PEM on you in midstream or in mid-evaluation. Any questions about the PEM 2.0, where we're at with current implementation? Anything about where sort of the PEM side of this equation? No? Okay. So, whoops. Hey, do me back again. What I wanted to do next is try to explain or put in perspective the difference between an accreditation scheme and an evaluation scheme, because it's been suggested that the PEM is fit for use as accreditation scheme. And I would suggest that that's not necessarily true. It was designed for a different purpose. We've done some fairly novel things with the PEM, and we want to be able to capitalize on that, but I think we need to actually take a step back and think about what takes place when you do accreditation. So, Laura, time for us to do our juggling act, okay? Can you bring up the NIST document? So NIST, I believe, on April 30th, released the latest version, Release 4 of 800-53, which incorporates Appendix J. And Appendix J provides guidance on privacy controls. And what I want to highlight is that when you're looking at things like this guidance, you're getting specific controls, okay? It's giving you, can you scroll down like a little bit? A couple pages maybe? Till we get to a control or two. Keep going. Keep going, yep. Keep going. NIST document is a mile long. Keep going. Okay, stop. So this is the kind of material that you want to see for accreditation purposes. You want to see a control that's fairly explicitly defined. You want to have guidance on what that control means and how you implement that control. And you want to be able to use that as a basis in accreditation for determining whether or not somebody conforms to that control's guidance, okay? So let me show you a separate, there are pages and pages, I think there's about 30 pages in the Appendix J. Go ahead and show up the other one, please. The privacy, so I got this is why coming to the plenary is so important. I got this yesterday from, actually, where's Kalia? Kalia, saved the day again, told me about this last night, and it was really excellent guidance. The Patient Privacy Rights Group has produced a framework. If you scroll down, page 6 is the place to start. There we go. So this gives you a great example of two things I think are important. One is it articulates a set of principles related to privacy, things like patients can easily find and review and understand the privacy policy, okay? Easy to understand principles. These principles, if you'll page down, okay? Page down a little more, stop there. Okay, they're right there. So here they've articulated the principle and then a set of requirements that are used to establish that principle. Now, I want to draw your attention to a couple of these. Let's start with, let's do 1.5. Privacy policy shall attain a Fleisch reading ease score of 25 or higher. No, 45 or higher. Whoops. Hey, you're making the presenter have difficulty. Okay, so this is something that has absolutely nothing to do with privacy, right? But it has everything to do with accrediting a privacy practice or privacy principle like a policy that's easy to read because it defines a requirement for that. Another one that might be a little more digestible is shall use a minimum of a 9-point font, all right? Now, that is a very explicit requirement that you can check in an accreditation scheme and say, yes, this organization has a privacy policy, yes, it's easy to read, it has 9-point font, reading scores, and everything else in here, okay? Now that's an easy example. And it's the type of control and the type of criteria for accreditation that is wholly and completely different from what we have in the PEM. All right, we're not really concerned in the PEM about what font size you're using. What we are concerned about, if we can go to the PEM, and what is unique about the PEM and what is being, I guess I'll say it this way, what is receiving such high praise in the PEM is a rather novel approach that we've taken. So we start with the evaluation page. So we've framed the PEM up to leverage a information lifecycle as a construct for considering and evaluating privacy issues and risks. This lifecycle has the things you'd expect: collection, processing, use, disclosure, retention, etc. And that construct in this particular stage of the process allows us to dissect or otherwise characterize a deliverable. So if we can go to, I'm going to reverse order. Can you go to this one here, FIPS and CPBR? So we know that FIPS is one of the base elements we're going to use for evaluation. And FIPS gives us very good guidance on privacy principles and practices. And when we were creating the PEM, we spent quite a bit of time looking at other resources. We looked at things like the OECD FIPS. And then we looked at things like APEC PIPS and FIPS. When's this guy going to shut up when we get out of here? The moment of revelation for me was looking at the APEC FIPS, because all the other FIPS kind of have these practices, but APEC had one that was unique, and that was a consequence FIP. And when you invoke consequence, you now set yourself up to bring things like harms and risks into the equation. So if you can go to i.e. privacy harms, this one here, yep. So what we were able to do was essentially take Daniel Solov's taxonomy of privacy, which, among other things, describes a set of privacy harms, and incorporate those into our evaluation methodology. So we can now consider, in looking at a privacy issue or a privacy risk, the consequence of that deficiency in a control or otherwise poor practice. So you can look at things like a breach of trust or induced disclosure or power imbalance or unanticipated revelation, things that really don't show up in a controls document or a control-centric type of guidance. So this is fairly novel because in many respects, privacy is a very difficult thing to say. You do this and then you get privacy, right? You follow this control and you're guaranteed to have privacy. There's a lot of dynamic to it. There's a lot of interesting implications associated with what and how data is used. And so we can actually, with the invoking harms, do something that's more akin to a risk analysis, right? We can look at the practice or the issue that we're concerned about, and we can consider that in the context of this consequence. So it allows us to establish, I think, a more robust evaluation, a more robust articulation of the types of exposures that could be in play with a particular issue or privacy risk. So let me take you back to how this thing gets applied, because I think this is where we can really strike the difference between accreditation and evaluation. And that's right, please? Yes? Okay. So as I so eloquently said earlier, not really, this is where we've actually populated in these cells what I would call an interpretive guidance for somebody using the evaluation methodology, right? So we've got here a FIP for transparency. And this happens to be the life cycle phase of collection, and it's further broken down into direct collection, and it says, is there a clear descriptive notification regarding the collection practices? So it gives the evaluator some very clear guidance and something to consider to evaluate whether that particular FIP has been invoked in this particular part of their evaluation, and gives them that sort of reference point for interpreting that. And this is really the clear distinction, is the evaluation methodology is set up in such a way that it is an interpretive document. It's used to interpret risks and issues, privacy risks and issues, in the work products of the IDESG. And what we need, from an accreditation perspective, is something that can be used to evaluate the practices of somebody that's submitting their solution or process or whatever it is to the accreditation scheme in a way that's more of a, do you have these controls and are those controls explicitly defined so that you, submitting yourself to the process, know what to expect and are able to, with a high degree of confidence, submit your solution to that and be assured that you'll come out with a reasonably consistent accreditation result. Does that make sense to folks? That distinction between controls and those rather explicit prescriptive control language and the interpretive sort of framework language that we have in the PEM. Does that make sense? Okay. So we think it's really novel that we've been able to invoke consequence, and the PEM is, I think, a very worthwhile deliverable, but it's not a deliverable that's fit to be turned into an accreditation standard. And so we've sort of struggled with, well, what do we do? Do we, it wasn't designed for that, it was designed for internal use. And in late night negotiations, all happening within the last 72 hours, we agreed to put forward a bit of a proposal. Now, I've got to put about a half a dozen caveats out here. First of all, this has not gone through the Privacy Committee and been endorsed by the Privacy Committee in our processes of developing consensus on what we're doing. So I'll take full responsibility for overstepping my bounds as chair and proposing this to the plenary. But we just finished our privacy meeting, and there was a very robust discussion. And there are some concerns about how we might be approaching this and whether we're clearly articulating what we're trying to do. But that's, I think, what we want to do with the balance of our time is discuss this proposal for an articulation that defines or helps describe what we're trying to achieve from an accreditation perspective with regards to privacy, distinguish it from the PEM and kind of put to rest any notions that we're going to recast the PEM as an accreditation scheme. And then see what you, as the members of the plenary, feel, whether this would be of value, and if so, we're having a privacy committee meeting on Monday, and I'll take that up as official business and see if I can, retain my chairmanship and actually get them to approve this course of action. So, Laura, can we go back to the slide deck, please? Okay. So here's what we're proposing. We need some sort of articulation. And anything you see in brackets, don't get wrapped around the axle about the word, because it's there to sort of frame up what we're proposing, not necessarily to be absolute. But we need some sort of articulation about how we're going to approach accreditation from a privacy perspective. The reason, among other things, is that nobody's done it before. Does everybody agree? Anybody dispute that question? Accreditation in privacy is not something that exists currently. So we have some interesting green fields here from the IDESG. And I think we also have an interesting opportunity to reinforce the value of what this organization has undertaken in a way that helps advance our interests. To do that, we need to provide some sort of articulation that describes what we think privacy accreditation should be, how it should work, what we're going to do to try and manifest that. So, a couple of bullet points. Let me explain. Like I said, I spent an hour going through this. We want to create a separate deliverable that's completely separate from the PEM. Let's not make this about the PEM at this point. Let's take this on as a question of how do you do privacy accreditation, okay? What we want to do is describe an IDESG roadmap or other sort of guidance document that leads us to explaining this notion of enhanced privacy and how we'll do privacy accreditation as part of the trust framework and the work of the IDESG. Now, we put a caveat on here, we'll put a disclaimer on this. We're not talking about the formal accreditation deliverable. We're not talking about formalizing that criteria at this stage in this deliverable. This is really a concept piece, and we want to make sure we make that distinction so people don't go, hey, how come we don't have an accreditation process when you delivered this document you promised to make? I think it's also important to note that and I think was reinforced by Jack, who was in our discussion a little while ago, that developing the privacy accreditation component of our accreditation process is a joint effort. It's not something where the privacy committee runs off, develops their accreditation process for privacy, comes back and goes ta-da, and then we try to figure out how to bolt it onto the existing overarching accreditation process. We want to be able to contribute the subject matter expertise in privacy, provide some insight into how this might be accomplished, participate collaboratively with the accreditation trust framework. I've forgotten now. We're going to need the triumvirate committee that we have now for taking on this challenge, and work collaboratively to achieve what I think could be a really novel result. What we want to also do, I think, to some extent, is capitalize on the rather interesting accomplishment we have in the PEM when it comes to incorporating this notion of consequences in privacy, because the minute you start tying the consequences to privacy, you start making it a little bit more meaningful instead of just, well, we have to have this privacy thing. We have to understand privacy in the context of those consequences, and accreditation needs to be consistent with that. So you wind up with, I think, instances where the nature of the consequence associated with the type of data is going to drive alternatives from an accreditation perspective. But everything is TBD in terms of what might go into this document, and it really is an exercise in trying to start framing up the question, trying to start defining a bit of a roadmap to how we get there, and to really make a couple of clarifications. This is targeted towards use outside of the Privacy Committee and ostensibly use outside of the IDESG, to give some external guidance on where we, the IDESG, are coming from when it comes to privacy accreditation. The other thing is that because this is a work product of the Privacy Committee, it'll be subject to the work product adoption process of the IDESG. And we make that distinction for one very important reason, which is the PEM is an internal work product of the Privacy Committee, and as such is not subject to the approval or adoption process. We're trying to keep that document, up to date. We're doing the updates as we described in the 90-day process. It's not necessarily a externalized or external document. It's something that the Privacy Committee uses to fulfill its responsibility. So this is to distinguish that this deliverable is subject to, as any deliverable, that adoption process. So that's my last slide. And I'd ask if there are any questions. If you want to clarify, if you want me to clarify anything, I'm happy to try and, do that. Hands, yes, sir. Oh, who's got, there's our mic guy. So you, Kenny, and then, there we go. Oh, you got the mic? Okay, sorry, Kenny. Next mic that comes free will be yours. You, sir.
It's me? Okay. Colin Wallace, individual. Okay, so just a couple of things there. The critical thing on that slide, of course, is what you mean by accreditation. Starting with backing off a little bit, trusting that the committee's going to be informed by international work going on. You mentioned a moment ago that there was no privacy mark that you're aware of, and that was whispering to me that, of course, there is in Japan, and I think there are in other areas, other countries as well. There also is work going on in ISO 29190, Privacy Capability Assessment Model, for example, which would inform this. So that's a kind of a different. The Privacy Capability Assessment Model is how you would assess an organisation's maturity. They couldn't use capability maturity model, CMM, from Carnegie Mellon, because you know what would happen there. So, so that is the sort of thing that I would have thought would have been informing this work. So when you talk about accreditation, that probably does, as you pointed out yourself, has to be really clearly articulated. Is it for the whole organisation? Is it for a particular design pattern or a particular piece of process that's involved? So you're going to have to, I suggest, really nail that down to avoid a whole lot of confusion.
It's in there. It'll be in there. It's absolutely why we think we need something like this. Is those questions are, I think, relevant and do need to be answered. And they are currently sort of undefined answers. So, so Kenny, if you got a mic, go ahead.
Ben Wilson, Digicert. So, did you look into having gradations? I mean, it's sort of, with accreditation, it seems like it's a binary. You get past us and you're accredited, but it might be more valuable for a lot of the constituents to be able to look at something and say, oh, they can sort of balance, where they fit on the continuum.
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent point. It'll be in there. That's the kind of consideration we want to take a look at and make sure we incorporate in the document.
So, Kenny, AT&T, part of the roadmap, I think you probably will, if not already, consider the sustainability of your help or the committee's capability offering to assess, or at least, if IDESG formally will offer accreditation service by itself, then whether the experts within the privacy committee would be involved or not, and there's a sustainability because how long people are going to be in that committee, for instance.
Yes, well, and that's an excellent point. If we do or don't engage in those type of services is kind of, as I say, it's above my pay grade. That's something the accreditation committee will address. And then if they address that, that once again becomes a consideration that influences how we approach this from a privacy accreditation perspective. So, I mean, the thing I think we can recognize from those last three comments is there are a lot of undefined things when we say the IDESG is going to have a trust mark and provide accreditation, right? And there are meta questions that should be addressed by the accreditation committee. And then there are those privacy-specific ones that we want to make sure we're contributing to and helping address, and that help us define or answer those questions, or otherwise provide a perspective on those questions that might help influence the final, what we wind up doing, the process we undertake to actually build this accreditation system. Other questions? All right, so I'm asking a question of you then. Is this something that the plenary thinks would be a useful pursuit for the privacy committee or for this organization? Is there anybody who feels like this is a waste of time, a boondoggle, some kind of ill-defined or ill-considered activity? Or do you believe this is worthwhile pursuit and that this would be a useful outcome? You have to pick one, yes or no. Anybody object to it?
How about if you stand and you think no?
You stand and you think no? Yes, so everybody who agrees with this, I'll wrap up my presentation. If you disagree, I'll keep going. Are there any other questions about this? We're gonna take it up at the privacy committee. Yes, we'll take it up at the privacy committee, see how the privacy committee feels about it. We'll formalize the adoption of this as a deliverable for the committee through the committee processes, assuming that this gentleman doesn't object and we wind up.
No, I think this is good work. I came in late, so it might have been explained in the beginning, but what's the difference between PEM and PIA methodology?
From PEM and PIA, okay.
PIA methodology.
Yes. So the difference I think I could describe from the inception of the PEM, which was the PEM from the beginning has always been defined as an evaluation methodology for evaluating the IDESG work products from a privacy perspective, for privacy and identity-related civil liberties issues. So your standard sort of PIA is something that looks at practices in an organization to try and determine whether there are privacy issues that need to be addressed. So those types of mechanisms don't really fit the requirement of being able to evaluate privacy issues in a work product as opposed to privacy issues in a practice, a process or otherwise business practice within an organization. So we realized, I think, right away that PIAs and sort of trying to recast a standard PIA approach wasn't going to necessarily be fit for use when it came to evaluating privacy issues in the work products of the IDESG. Does that answer your question? So, and now we're really looking at a third thing, which is, how do we do an accreditation function for privacy? Okay, have we got any other questions or anything else I can address? As always, I appreciate the time and the opportunity to talk to you about what's going on from a privacy perspective, and I will yield the balance of my time so we can all get out of here a little early. Thanks, everybody.
Great.
Thanks, Dr.
So there's an identity conundrum here. I am Bob Blakely. And actually, as vice chair, I'm Dazza Greenwood. Bob asked if I would assist in the wrap of the day. In his absence, he had to leave a little early, as I think he mentioned. And I wanted to ask, given the time now, whether it would be the will of the group that we just go ahead and do the wrap at this point, rather than take a 15-minute break and then come back and do a wrap. Is that? Yep. Wrap it, pack it, ship it. Okay. Great. So I will thank our coffee break sponsors at the end of the wrap, and invite you to enjoy that coffee. But first, to get us started on the wind down and the synthesis of what happened, I'd like to invite our Management Council Chair, Peter Brown, to make some remarks. Thanks, Peter.
Well, of course, now we're all caught with our pants down, as we say in English, because this is sort of 15 minutes earlier than it would have been. So that's the second time today I've been put on the spot. But anyway, let's coffee, food, and lots of conversation have helped change the situation as it was from this morning. A couple of takeaways that I see is. This is speaking really off the top of my head, and I think that's the value of this process, is there remains and this isn't necessarily a negative point, but there remains a disjoint between the type and content of the discussions we have as a plenary and the type and the content of discussion we have within the individual committees. And we discussed this a little bit at the Communications and Outreach meeting at the end of the morning, which is that the window into the work of the organisation that other people are looking through will depend which window they're looking in, will give them a picture, it's the sort of blind man and the elephant type of situation, of the health of the organisation and the depth of the work. And I don't think anybody here, myself included, even though I took a rather masochistic approach of trying to sign up to all the committee mailing lists to get a sense of what was going on across the board, I don't think anyone really has today a full oversight and insight into the depth and breadth of work that's going on in the different committees, or indeed in the plenary. There are people in the plenary that are not in committee work. There's a lot of work going on in committees which isn't done in plenary. So we still have a very core challenge as an organisation, I think, in terms of communicating outwards to our existing members, people who have signed the membership agreement, signed on the dotted line, say, I want to be part of this, but are nonetheless not active in either plenary or committee activities, and whatever the reasons for that are, and they're multiple. We have a challenge in terms of making sure there is a coherent, if I could say that, a coherent or an integrated conversation about how work's progressing. I think we've seen some good steps in the right direction nonetheless, and I think the presentation that Paul Laurent did yesterday morning, giving us a bit of a sort of high-level insight in terms of the breadth of work that's being done, and I use the sort of signalling sort of paradigm, metaphor of, there's lots of trains running on different tracks. We've got to make sure they don't crash into each other, that things are getting on and people are getting to their destinations. And I think we're starting to realise and take ownership of, and that's certainly a management council issue, of owning the problem and providing a solution to this integration of work and ensuring that there is a good, smooth flow of work from committees through to the plenary into stuff which is actually going to the outside world. So we have one challenge just within our own membership, but I think we also have a challenge externally. And what was interesting in another discussion was around, following the discussion this morning we had on sort of transition towards a self-sustaining organisation. One thing that comes from that is a realisation also there isn't a simple linear process of saying, okay, this is this is our value proposition, this is our business model, these are the types of membership levels, these are the types of members we need to go after, go get them, and you build as a result. It's a very iterative process through which we are saying, well, we've got some ideas, and Kim gave a very good oversight of that in terms of, we've got some ideas of what other people are doing at the moment. We've got some ideas about members in the room of what sort of membership model they would like. And what we now need to do is to do some sort of testing of those sort of ideas and having some outreach to organizations who are not yet here, or even organizations that are here and are hesitant about getting fully engaged, and saying, well, do you think we should be going more in this sort of direction? Are these sort of membership structures the ones we need? Are these the sort of membership fee levels that might be appropriate? And having that discussion over the next couple of months, so that when we come to the next plenary, we've got a much clearer picture both of what the existing organizations and members are looking for in terms of the direction of the organization and the way things are moving, but also getting some solid feedback from those, let's say, the core constituents within the different stakeholder categories that we've already identified who are not at the table, and seeing how they're brought in. So I think there's there's a clear pattern of work to be done. And from my point of view, those are just the sort of two top-level observations that I have. I think the work goes in waves. There's I don't think any of us here have an insight into what's happened in every committee today, but there's clearly other work has been advanced further on. So this whole question about communications is not just a sectoral responsibility of one committee and of one body. It's something I think permeating, or needs to permeate, the whole culture of the organization, that we all have individually and collectively a responsibility for trying to communicate out the sort of goals we're trying to go towards and the sort of objectives and activities that we're developing to move towards that. So those are just my high-level comments. But I really appreciate some feedback from people on the floor as well. But I'll let you animate that as I would moderate that.
Thank you, Peter. Let's hear from the floor. And Kenny, if you start us off, please.
Right. So, Peter, I would suggest that among the list of Management Council-led tasks that you have enumerated, such as value proposition, work plans, and all of that. And I'll state that I think that one of the very critical point that needs to be clarified and articulated very early is what kind of products are going to be produced. I made the point earlier. I just want to emphasize, what is the end game here? What is IDESG going to produce? Okay, so not to belabor that point, and I want to rub it in a little bit, to use your analogy, when will we find out we're doing all this signaling and changing track and so on, that we are about providing a train service?
Yeah.
When do we know that?
Yeah.
And while we're looking for our next victim, did you want to speak to Kenny's point?
No, I think
Great.
I think it's a valid question. Off the top of my head, it's not for me to answer, but I think you're saying there's the challenge that we do have to answer that, and I think that you're absolutely right. I think, was Jim over here?
Yep. Hello. Shake it. There we go. So I'm hearing, and we seem to be repeating this notion of membership levels, membership fees. We keep repeating that sort of investigation into that. There seems to be, the bulk of Kim's material focused on that, or had at least some reference to that. Are we doing the same thing for the other potential business models? Because I think membership fees as a foregone conclusion has a negative side to it. Right. Some organizations will not be amenable to that. So how are we doing the same level of investigation into the other business models?
So I'll answer that, and I'll also challenge you that if you look at my slides, I had no slide beside one bullet that said membership levels. The group decided to have a lot of discussion on that, but that's never been, and the reason why I point that out is that we have never made that the sole focus for us. So we're spending the same amount of effort on everything from a membership level to a potential Trustmark revenue stream to sponsorship and in-kind donations. So we're taking all of those equally into consideration.
Great, thank you. Other members of the plenary Oh, yes. Colin.
Just to add to Kenny's point, perhaps another way of articulating it is there are a series of strategic questions which will have to be answered. They're going to be hard. They're going to be hard, and we're going to, sooner or later, and it's going to, we're running out of time, we're going to have those really hard conversations. Let's take trust marks and revenue streams as an example. In this room, there are, of the 100 or so of us, there are probably 40 different views about, is that a very light touch on the top of existing external organisations that do that, and we would be taking a light piece of that, that top-up type revenue from that, to a full-scale, full-on rebuild a whole trust mark. These are difficult conversations, and we will have to get, as hard as they are, we're going to have to crunch them.
Thank you. Some other feedback before we hear from Jeremy and continue with the wrap, to Peter's invitation for participation. Yes. Is it Sita Rama?
Yeah. So on the theme of membership dues, the thing that strikes me is that I think we are looking at NSTIC and IDESG as solving common man's problem, and at the risk of probably saying not the right thing, I would say that if we ask our bosses when we go home and say, hey, we need to pay these dues and be part of this effort, the first question that will come up is, how are we going to benefit from it, right? So I think we need a clear answer for the businesses as to what they will gain at the end of this day. It's not the question that it's going to be an egalitarian effort that we all should be part of. That's not going to be the right answer.
Thank you.
Can I answer that one again?
Yeah, there's Kim.
In the presentation, the two questions that I posed to the plenary that we will follow up on through the stakeholder groups is, one, what are the top reasons why you and or the organization you represent are current members of the IDESG? And what will be required for you and or your organization to become a member of a self-sustaining organization? And that's really to help us get to those value propositions to answer exactly what you're saying. Because same for me, I have no ability to if I can't articulate why my company should be a part of it, I doubt I'm going to be able to find funding there, right? So I agree with you 100%, and that's going to be a great effort for all of us to focus on.
Thank you, Kim. And so with that...
Yeah, just one comment while Kim was speaking there, which was to... I apologize, I introduced the question about membership levels again, but it's back to my point. I think I was trying to articulate, which I think does go in the direction we're talking, which is that if we see it just as this, we're going to do this, then this, then this, then this, as just a simple linear process, it'll take a long time because we'll be asking anticipatory questions before we've got further down the road. But I think I really want to underline this thing, that this is a conversation which we all need to have, both within the organization, within our own organization members, for those people who are here as representatives of organizations or companies or government agencies or whatever, and with the people that we want to try and do a first phase of outreach towards. That conversation has to be that broader conversation, not just about, oh, if it's going to cost this, will you get on board, but rather, as you say, what is it? What is the nature of the organization that you think you ought to be joining, and for which you will feel that you're providing a benefit for your members, for your organization, for society more broadly, or whatever is there in terms of your own value proposition, and getting people engaged in that conversation so we can actually shape what are the priorities. And if at the end of the day people are saying, well, what we want is 300 million Americans going away with some little thing which allows them to do trusted online transactions, that is a very different type of beast that we would have to create than the sort of thing we're talking about where it's a combination of technology, of social issues, of legal, regulatory, or other issues bound together. So I think that's, we all, what I'm trying to just underline is we're all responsible for that conversation. And I think that's, that's where we want to move things in the next couple of months. With that, I'm done.
Great, thank you very much, Peter. And the Management Council will be meeting today at 4 p.m. after a brief coffee break. And next, we'd like to hear from my fellow Vice Chair, from Jeremy Grant on behalf of the NPO, please.
Thanks. Let me come up so I can get on the camera. I was told yesterday when I stand too far forward, it's a problem. I'll try to be real quick. I thought, first off, this was not just the feedback I got from quite a lot of you was this was a good plenary. It was moving the ball forward. People were excited to have the conversations we had, even when there was not always agreement on them. We were starting to have the right conversations, being able to talk about the pilots, being able to talk about work planning for what this organization is actually going to do was quite an important thing, and it made for a couple of great days. What I actually wanted to address just in closing remarks is actually getting back to the comment that Sita Rama had just made about this is something, if we're just trying to solve a problem for the common man, where's the business value in it? And I actually, say not just to you, but, all of you in the room, if you're looking at it from that perspective, it's really the wrong way to look at it, in that there is value that's out there. The fact that you're asking the question shows that it needs to be articulated better to stakeholders, both in this room and more importantly to those who aren't here. Both from a security standpoint, when you look at reports like the Verizon data breach report that came out last month that they do in partnership with the Secret Service, 76% of all records breached globally last year were due to improper or inadequate authentication. There's companies sitting in the room that lost money and customers because of that, and there's a lot of others that aren't out here. The fact that we're continuing to rely on passwords and other bad authentication mechanisms does cause real problems and cost real dollars. Beyond that, when you start to look at some of the more exciting business opportunities as we enter the world of big data, as identity sharing, personalization in electronic commerce becomes more and more important, when you look at the inadequate way that we're actually handling things like identity, authentication, attribute exchange, there's a whole world of economic opportunities that can be opened up for companies in this room and out if we can figure out a way to do it better. So we had the 5 pilots sitting up here yesterday, and it seemed to generate, quite a bit of excitement as people were learning about some of what the art of the possible is these days, both from where technology is, seeing Dayon's, 5 factors in, 5 seconds with thumping techno music seemed to excite quite a few people, but also some of the policy frameworks and business models that are being created. The one thing that was clear, and I mentioned it early on in my introductory remarks for the speech, but I want to leave everybody here with that again, is that the one common theme that's emerged from each of the pilots is that while this is exciting stuff and they're making progress, the amount of work that they're doing, basically trying to negotiate terms with each relying party, trying to figure out how to fill in the gaps that are there when it comes to interoperability, service level agreements for different responsibilities. These are the kind of areas where we need trust frameworks. We need an identity ecosystem framework that can actually provide an infrastructure for pilots like the ones we showed yesterday and ones that we'll fund in a couple of months and others that many of you in this room are going to be working on as you come up with new innovations in the space. These are essentially the tracks you need to build so that the trains can run over them. And that, I think, is where the real economic value is to this organization, because if there is not a framework for the ecosystem, we're going to continue to see different new innovations, move in fits and starts. Not to say we won't make forward progress, but there's much more that we can actually do if we have a framework that's in place of standards and policies to actually build all of this ecosystem on top of. So with that, I appreciate all the time you guys have spent out here the last couple of days and your continued commitment and leadership in participating in this organization. And I'll hand it back to Daza for the close.
I thank you very much, Jeremy. There's just a few remarks to make by way of wrapping this plenary. And the themes were, number one, to reflect on the profound importance of the pilots that we did see, beginning finally to harvest the value in an actionable way of the various aspects of NSTIC that we are co-creating together here through the IDESG. The relation of that to the work plan that was presented and that brings together the goals and objectives in an actionable way that we can prioritize and measure progress on the field this year. That ties back to the major theme of value again, and value that can be tied to the common man, the providers of technology, the relying parties of technology, the various stakeholding groups. There are more than one vantage point. There's value as a theme. The accreditation, certification, and trustmark and legal group did meet today and made tremendous progress on coming together again to realize part of the essence of one of the roles that IDESG can play. And again, the theme was, how do we relate this to the facts on the ground today, to what the marketplace wants, to what would be aligned with our capabilities and our transition plan, the value. And that was one of the key anchor points of that group. The talk about transition and the great work that's happening in the subcommittee of the Management Council, doing a remarkable analysis of different models at different layers, again, connected to more pieces that can be put together to reflect and support where our value is and to make the most graceful and elegant and successful transition at this point in our analysis of that. And finally, the engagement has come up as a theme through each of the plenary sessions and in many of the committee meetings, certainly in accreditation and in governance as well, engaging with the members here to poll and to survey and to hear and to talk about how best to tune our activities and to engage with the marketplace, with the stakeholders, frankly, with the budding ecology itself is one of the key roles that we play uniquely here. Again, to define and to adapt to where the value is. And in closing, the theme, what's different about the IDESG and what's brought us together here in part is precisely that to have an identity ecosystem, and many have tried before, something that's been missing is if it comes from one sector, or if it comes from the government, or if it comes from the vantage point of a given stakeholder group, no matter how brilliant it may be, ultimately we have found that it is not adoptable because we have a multilateral, pluralistic society and decentralized economy here. IDESG looked at the hard problem from NSTIC directly and with our stakeholder groups and our varied representation here does meet the legitimacy test. It's a place where we have the ACLU and the EFF, and we have some of the largest corporations. We have big and small governments. We have consumer groups. We have academia. We've got a sufficient set at the table and a sufficient set looking on from the sidelines and a sufficient amount of organization and goals and progress and timeline to realize the vision. And so the value, I want to say, isn't in the future, it's right now. We've already exceeded what any other attempt at this has been able to achieve thus far, and it is highly valuable. And it's just the beginning. Our next, I'm honored and excited to announce the next plenary session that we're going to have, July 24th to 26th, will be at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology at the Media Lab. How cool. So you can come by and play with the robots and get steeped in innovation. And that's a place where, as Jeremy and earlier Bob and Peter foreshadowed, it's a time and it's a place in the sequence of our resources in the period where many things will come together, where we will begin to harvest and concretize what the action plan is going to be. So the work between now and that plenary is going to be very important at the committees and in our deliberative bodies and online, and that will be a culmination point, and then we'll have to run a lot of plays successfully from there through the next plenary in October and through the rest of the calendar year into our transition, or into our ascension to our stable state body. And it's on behalf of MIT, I can say it's an honor to have been working with you all to make our resources available so that we have the conditions set for the best possible chance to achieve and realize the value that we're here to accomplish. What could be more valuable than coffee at the end of a long day? I would like to also thank Resilient for providing the coffee break, which now I would invite everybody to enjoy. And if you're at your home, have a cup of coffee with us. Get on the Twitter stream, and we'll see you online. And with that, I hereby respectfully close this plenary session, and we stand adjourned. Thank you very much.